Morning. How you are all doing?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Hope, hope you're doing good and you have recovered, sir.
Yes, much better now. It was bad, but now it's much better.
Okay.
Right. What was your agenda for the last week? What all you do? Did you enjoy? Did you practice? Did you learn anything that you did last week?
Dr. Shrinu had given us to complete the activity in the OWASP top 10.
Hmm. Okay.
On your absence, she just sent us to complete that. And on the before Saturday, when you left, you asked us to be prepared with Kali Linux and CentOS. We
Hmm.
stopped at stride what is it the threat modeling.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So let me just share my screen. Can somebody give me the presentation rights? Bhumika, can you give me the presentation rights? Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. It's visible now.
All right, perfect. Now, in our last session, the one that we did earlier to this last week, rather, we talked about the strides model, wherein we looked at a thread from a perspective of a diagrammatic representation. We looked at it from a process, from data sinks perspective, from a storage perspective as well. This week, we are going to look at two new models. One is the cyber kill chain, which is a Lockheed Martin, and the second one is the Mithray attack. Both of these models are unique in a way they approach the threats or the threat actors altogether, and there is no one and there is no one threat model which fits it all the sizes. So you may use strides for a particular situation or a particular business, and you may use a Lockheed Martin for a particular situation. Attack, on the other hand, which is a Mithray attack framework, you may find it useful when you have seen an attack happening within your organization, or when you are planning to prevent against a specific breach or attack. Both Lockheed Martin and the Mitre attack, both are kind of similar in a way they approach the threat actors and the threat adversaries. However, the larger or an expansion of the Lockheed Martin is what the Mitre attack model is, and we are going to look at it. So don't worry on the coverage part. So the Lockheed Martin way. So when we say Lockheed Martin, anybody is aware what this organization Lockheed Martin do, what they are known for?
Not sure,
Air,
Parashar, but
air defense.
Sorry.
They are into defense.
So what in defense?
Yeah, the moreover the aeronautical what is
Hmm.
that defense side.
Correct.
they make war missiles, that is to take down aircrafts. Lockheed
Hmm.
Martin missiles.
Correct. So they are into the FCR, they are into the underwater vehicles, they are into the radar systems, they are into the aeronautics. So all that is what they do, majorly into the combat side. Now, when an organization is into a combat side, what would they focus upon? The offense and the defense both. Similarly, for this cyber threat model as well, they have come out with both the models. It's a one model only, but can be adopted by either the defensive organization or an offensive attacker. So the model can be used by both of them. Now, when we talk about the Lockheed Martin way, when we talk about the Lockheed Martin way, essentially there are 7 stages is what they categorize the entire framework into. Now, think about a situation before we go on to the model. Think about a situation where you want to attack an organization, right? So, what would be your approach? You would first like to study about your target. Similarly, what we do in the defense, we study the target, how much capability they have, how much the ammunition they have, how many people they have in the armed forces, what are the what are the borders that they are covering, what machinery they have, etc. So, what surveillance mechanism they have. So, it's more about knowing the target or making yourself aware about the target profile. Why you need that step? Because if you know your target well, then you know the vulnerabilities or the weaknesses as well in them. And once you know the weakness of your target, you can exploit that, or you can at least prepare to exploit that particular weakness. So, reconnaissance is the first step that in the offense or a defense you need to be aware about, that if I am going to attack a particular target, I would first do an reconnaissance or a profiling of a target. Once I have that reconnaissance done or the profiling done of the target, the second step for me would be to create or to choose a weapon. If I know that my target is doesn't have that much of a airspace capability, I would probably choose the combat jets for attack on the territory of my or the other nation. So I will weaponize myself in a way which exploits the vulnerability of the target. Once I have chosen the weapon, it can be an RDX, it can be a kind of a warhead, or it can be a air strike. So once I have sorry. So once I have chosen the weapon, the next step for me is to deliver that weapon into the territory of the enemy or the target. So what I will do, I will deliver, or I will choose my payload to deliver that weapon into the attack side or into the target side. Once the delivery happen, then my ideology would be to use that weapon. And how would I use that weapon? By exploiting a vulnerability or the weakness in the target. So I will exploit that target, and I will exploit the vulnerability or the weakness which has been identified during the profiling stage. So this is how the attack would happen from a target standpoint. Now, if I have to translate that into the real world situation from a cyber standpoint, I would still do the reconnaissance. I would profile my target, what what application they are using, what kind of language they have written a web application upon, what infrastructure they have, what kind of social profiling the individuals has there, how many people they have, what kind of people they employ, are they experienced, are they newbies, what are the different physical locations they operate from. So I will do a proper reconnaissance to profile a particular target. Then, according to the profile, I will create a weapon for the exploitation. So I'll share one example. I was I was going through. So we were performing a red team exercise basically for one of the banks in Mumbai, and they had a DR data center in Jaipur. So the task was to breach the perimeter and obtain some documents or some confidential information from the bank's data center. And we took that project. So what we did, and I was staying in Gurgaon at that time. So what we did, we boarded a train in the morning and we took a chair car. During that 2-3 hours of journey in the train itself, on the PowerPoint, we created a fake ID cards. We looked upon the individuals on the LinkedIn belong to that particular bank and who are at a senior positions, not very senior position because then everybody would know them, but kind of a mid senior position where not many people in Jaipur would know about them. So we looked at them. Uh, we took their photographs. We took their names, IDs, and we created a fake email addresses. We didn't know about their email addresses, but we said, okay, first name dot last name at the rate thebanks.com. So we created those IDs. Once those IDs are created, we landed up in Jaipur, had our breakfast, and then we went to a photo studio where we got those ID cards printed. We got those IDs printed, cut that into a proper shape, and then pasted on top of our own ID cards. And with full confidence, me and one of my colleagues, we both marched towards the data center. Once we were there, the security guard stopped us, and he was more about asking us our identities, where we are from, what is the reason that we were here there for. So we said that we are from the corporate office of your bank in Mumbai, and we are here to conduct the surprise audit. So he said, "What's your name?" So since we have looked up the name on the LinkedIn, we said this is what our name is. We looked at the ID card, so our photo and the ID card photo would match. So that was okay. Check for him. Then he said, "Okay, let me look up your name in the corporate directory." I said, "Okay, go ahead." So he looked up the name. The name popped up. That yes, these two gentlemen exist in the system. He said, "Okay, from which location of Mumbai you are coming?" We said, "We are coming from this location." He said, "Okay, we'll check your mobile numbers as well." I said, "Okay." He said, "What is your mobile number?" I gave our mobile numbers, and he sent out an OTP OTP landed onto our mobile. We gave the OTP and he said identity verified. Now, if in this entire episode, if you look at, the identity was not verified, there were steps performed, and the wrong identity was wrongly identified. So there was a weakness in their process where they didn't had, for example, the photograph of an employee in the directory where they can look up and they can say whether this photo matches or not. That is one. Second, since they didn't had any email confirmation of our visit, they ideally should have checked with the corporate team or should have asked us for an authorization letter from the corporate itself, signed and stamped by the bank itself, saying that this is a surprise audit and we are there for. He didn't ask us, and we didn't had that as well. So there were gaps, and he allowed us an entry. We went inside. We spent some 30 minutes, 40 minutes with the team there, understanding how the network is laid out, what interconnections they had, clicked some photographs, and came back. And that was a task done. We gave these observations and recommendations to the bank. They acted upon it, and the processes were improved and later on. Having said so, in this entire chain, if you look at, we did a reconnaissance of their processes. We did a reconnaissance of their IDs on the LinkedIn. We created a fake ID card. So that's a weapon that we created. Sorry. So we created that weapon, and then we executed that weapon as well when we landed up to the bank. There's a reconnaissance that we did, there's a weaponization that we did, and then there's a delivery of the weapon that happened. Exploitation of the process also happened in the entire course. Why? Because the process was exploited for us to get an access to that particular DR facility. Now, this was more like a physical breach. Now, in the cyber breach, there would be few additional steps. After the exploitation, you would want a particular exploit or a particular payload or a malware to be installed on the system so that you get a persistent access. So the step would involve an installation or the copy of that malware onto the system. And since you have done so much of an effort in creating a profile, creating the weapon, delivering that weapon, exploiting the vulnerability, getting that payload installed, you would obviously want a command and control situation where you can send out commands and you maintain that access to the system for a longer period of time. So you would command and you would control the system to take certain actions on the objective, and that is what the Lockheed Martin model is all about. So if you look at, there are 7 stages to it, which start from reconnaissance, goes to the weaponization where you select the weapon, then the delivery of the weapon happens, the exploitation happens, installation of the malware happen, and then the action, the command and control and the action on the objectives were taken. So these are the 7 stages of the cyber kill chain. Now, why we call it as a cyber kill chain? This is a model where it largely denotes an offensive strategy. Now, to make it useful from a defense standpoint, what you would need to do? It says in any of these 7 stages, if you are able to block or disrupt any one stage, then the breach is disturbed and the attack impact would be largely contained. So, for example, if on the reconnaissance stage, you don't allow the attacker to be aware about your targets or to be aware about the infrastructure that you are using or be aware about the coding or the frameworks that you are using to code, you're hiding your organization. So you are disrupting the chain at the very first stage of the reconnaissance. The second stage is the weaponization. So if you are able to disrupt the reconnaissance, then the attacker would choose an incorrect weapon. And that weapon will not work against you because you have hidden your traces, hidden your vulnerabilities as well accordingly. So if you are hiding yourself at a reconnaissance stage, the weaponization will not happen. But let's say the reconnaissance has happened successfully, but you want to disrupt the weaponization. Then it from a IT perspective, patch management and change management are the two important aspects where you can disrupt the weaponization as well. Weaponization usually takes the advantage of the weakness that you have in the environment. If you're able to plug that weakness or plug that gap at a very first stage with your proactive patch management or the changes that you're doing in the environment, if you're able to fix those, then you are disrupting the weaponization stage as well. Then comes the delivery. Now, delivery is a mechanism where you will have only 4 5 methods to deliver. So, for example, anybody has to deliver a malware. What they need a internet connectivity so that they can reach out to your system through internet, open port so that they can deliver it to you, or they can reach out to you through email, ask you to click on something, and they can then download that malware onto your system. So more like a phishing attack. Then the other way is they can uh, plug in the USB into your system and the malware can be transmitted, or they can keep the USB somewhere in a common place. You see that, you pick that USB and then you attach it to the system. So that is there. Nowadays, there are cables also available, which looks like a charging cable, but then they have a capability to execute a malware. So they have a remote connectivity, and it comes for USB-C and the Lightning cable as well. So both for iPhone and for Androids as well, these cables are available at a very dirt cheap price. So um, so the delivery can happen through USB. Then additionally, if you look at the delivery of the malware, at one system can happen through, let's say, a web or email or USB, but it can spread within the network or within the environment through a shared drive or a share folder as well. So the delivery can happen through a local network as well, right? So if you are able to figure out the various delivery mechanisms which are available in the organization, and you are able to control those delivery mechanisms as well, then you are disrupting the chain at this third layer. Then comes the exploitation. Now, from an exploitation, user access rights plays a very critical role, wherein if a person doesn't have a right to execute a code with an elevated privilege, you are disrupting the kill chain there. A higher possibility of disrupting the kill chain there. But then, if you are doing your user access reviews on a timely basis, if you are reconciling the active users and the dormant user IDs and disabling the dormant user IDs as well, then you are disrupting the exploitation stage. Having a UAC in place is also very effective when it comes to an exploitation disruption. Once the exploitation disruption happen, your kill chain gets disrupted and the entire breach fails out. However, let's say the exploitation also gets successful and the attacker was able to move into an installation stage again, which can be controlled by the access control, and believing that access control is a weakness there, we and the attacker lands up to a command and control stage. If you want to disrupt a command and control stage, the best mechanism is to have a strong internet policy. Because in a command and control, the attacker is operating from outside of the network in most of the cases. The attack is happening inside the organization and both needs to communicate. If you are able to figure out that communication, if you are able to identify those indicators of compromise in your network and are able to take the timely actions, then you are able to disrupt the kill chain at a command and control layer as well. So identifying and controlling the network or the internet connectivity is disruption that you can cause at a command and control layer as well. And then finally, actions on objectives. If you if you are able to limit the actions a user can perform on the target machine, then you can disrupt the kill chain at the last or the seventh stage as well. And obviously, you don't need somebody to follow the entire seven stages and put you into a breach situation. So if you are able to control or disrupt the attack in any of this, then you are able to disrupt the kill chain and safeguard yourself from the attack. Now, from a attackers and from a defense point of view. So at a first stage where you are doing a reconnaissance, you can profile the target by doing an active profiling or by doing a passive profiling. By active profiling, you can run the network mapper, which is Nmap. You can do banner grabbing to check what kind of services are running on a specific port. And you can run the vulnerability scanner like Burp, you can run like Acunetics. All those you can execute to check what kind of attack you can carry out against a particular target. Then, from a passive profiling perspective, you can look at a Whois database. You can search Google for some information. You have a Shodan search engine where you can be anonymous. You're not directly, I would say, hitting the target, yet you are capturing and you are finding the information about the target itself. You can go through the job portals and look out for a specific job posting by the organization to see if they are using a specific technology in their environment, for what technology they are hiring the individual, what level of the skills they are hiring for that technology, and that will tell you the strength or the dependency on that technology for that organization. You can also visit the company website for doing a passive profiling. And there is a classic case for this company website as well. So what happened in Bangalore, there's a bank, kind of a public sector bank only, and they got hit by a malware or a virus. So we were investigating what happened, and we figured out that the virus indeed was originated from within the organization. And we were hunting down for the individual who has done it. And we later on during the investigation, we got to know that there was one system which got compromised, and from there the attack basically started. So we looked at the traces of that system, and we were able to identify an individual who was operating outside of the bank but was having a control of that machine as well. So we were able to identify the individual, got hold of that individual too. And while we were inquiring of this breach to him, and he confessed that yes, he did it, and he was a developer. So we asked why you did it. He said, I just did it for the fun. There was no hidden motive behind it. So it was more like I am curious to develop something, and I developed this just to see whether it worked or not. We said, okay, how did you know that this virus will work against this bank? So he said, I I was not targeting this bank specifically. So what he did, he went onto a McAfee website, and there the McAfee was showcasing some of the premium customers that they have. So this bank was one among that list. And what he did then, he developed a code and he tested that code against the McAfee antivirus, and McAfee was unable to identify it as a malware or as a virus. So he said, okay, let me just try it out on this organization, whether they are able to detect it or not. And they were not. And that's how the attack happened. And there was no damage. There was no damage to the bank, but there was indeed a disruption to the service that happened. So this can happen if this can happen by the developer going onto the company website of a McAfee and figuring it out, the target there, it can happen in the real world as well in a larger and more disruptive scenario. Now, looking at a defense view at a reconnaissance, what you can do. So implement a stateful firewall inspection so that you are identifying what kind of packets are inbound and what kind of packets are outbound. Block the port probing on the firewalls so that you can disallow the nmap scannings, for example.
रूबी नाश्ता करूंगे रजा हाँ
Disable any unused ports within the hosted environment. So if you're not using the service, disable those ports or stop the services. Use the honeypots as well. And honeypots are important for you to be aware because these are kind of a system which looks like a vulnerable system. But then the moment an attacker attack into it, you get an alert and the monitoring of that system starts to happen. And once you're monitoring that system, you will get to know what are the different commands the attackers are running, what kind of clicks they are doing, where they are browsing in the system, what information they are looking for. So you will get to know all those traces through the honeypots, and according to those activity monitoring, you can then plug in those gaps on the real systems as well. Then have an IPS and the IDS in place. Inbound VPN connection should be used so that you are not allowing any other connection to reach to your organization internal network. Spread awareness on the information being posted publicly so that it's not a uncontrolled information which is going out, but rather you have a control of the information what is getting exposed to the public domain. Control the social media websites as well. Uh, then have a look at some of the posts which has been done by the authorized teams on the social media as well, just to see if they are posting the right content and if they are not divulging any insider information onto the public websites. Modify the services banner so that they reveal the alternative information rather than the real information about the service. So if you're running Apache, show the information of IIS 7. If you're running IIS 7, show the information of IIS 8.5, and so on. So you can alter you can alter the banner and change the banner as well, so that the when the attacker tries to profile you as an organization or as a system, then you have those traces covered up and they can create a wrong weapon for your environment. So you are putting a defense mechanisms there. When it comes to the second stage of the weaponization, there are different tools that you can use from a offensive standpoint or attacker point of view. You can have Kane Enable, which is a very strong tool which has been used by over years by multiple pen testers and the attackers as well. Very, very strong tool. So that's, and it works only on the local network, by the way. So you need to have an access to the physical layer or a physical perimeter of the system. So so Kane Enable is one tool. Then SQL Map is another tool which can be used remotely and locally over the network both. Aircrack NG can be used for the wireless pen testing or the intrusion. So it has a capability to identify the passwords or to make an attempt to break your passwords of the Wi-Fi as well if you're using a password-based authentication in the wireless. Then Metasploit is a very common tool for creating the weapons or for selecting the payloads and the exploits. You have exploit DB as well, where you have a ready-made exploits it, from a code perspective and from the instruction point of view as well. So even if you are not coding it, there might be certain exploits which tells you what steps to do. So you will find that on the exploit DB. Then you have a SET, which is a social engineering toolkit. Again, a very simple tool, yet very effective and very dangerous as well from a defense standpoint. So social engineering toolkit is another tool which is open source and can be used against an organization or against an individual. On the defense side, have the patch management processes and practices in place which will disrupt the weaponization, disable the unnecessary functionality of the software, disable the macros, have the installation rights, make sure the softwares have the signature based installation enabled, so have those controls enabled. Make sure you have the antivirus related controls implemented wherein the antivirus is installed. It is running all the time, administrative and the schedule scans are running. Antivirus definitions are up to date. No normal user can disable the antivirus. So all those controls that we looked into our last session around the antivirus, make sure those are configured and running. Then a common control between the first and the second chain, which is on the IDS and IPS. So have those IPS and IDS installed in your environment in the inline mode and make sure you have the updates applied to that as well. And they are detecting and protecting against it rather than only monitoring it. Then have the email security implemented, have the MFA, which is a multi-factor authentication implemented, audit logging, and make sure you're not using any unsigned softwares or the Java version within the environment. So these are some of the defense related views that you can have within the environment as well. Then delivery of the weapon happen where the attacker uses a website, a social media post, a user input, email, USBs are some ways that an attacker can deliver the weapon to your environment. From a defense standpoint, you can do a user awareness where you can get people into a gamified learning, you can get people into a regular presentation mode or a story based learning as well, or an experiential learning. So those kind of awareness efforts can be done. Web filtering and DNS filtering can be taken so that the web content which a person is trying to access can be restricted based on the white or the blacklist which is configured. Email filtering, which is a common control. IPS IDS, again a very common control. And then you have a DKIM as well. Now DKIM and SPF are two techniques using which the emails are identified to be coming from a trusted zone or a trusted domain or from an untrusted domain. These DKIM is nothing but a domain keys, and it has to do with the DNS as well as the SPF, which is a sender policy framework. So both DKIM and SPF utilizes your DNS records to prove the identity of the sending email domain to the recipient email domain. Then disable the USB storage and the connectivity. So make sure you have softwares like or the features like USB filters enabled and configured on the Windows environment. And even on the Unix machine, make sure that it's only the administrator who can enable and run the USB devices rather than everybody getting an access to the USB device. Exploitation stage, the attacker can use SQL injection, buffer overflow, script hijacking, malwares, etc. to exploit a particular vulnerability. So they have the weapon, they have delivered the weapon. Now the exploitation can happen of a specific vulnerabilities. So test your application, test your systems against those issues to see if your system or your environment is prone to any of these vulnerabilities or not. Also have make sure that you have a sandboxing available. Some of the softwares or the products that we have are like 40 sandbox, McAfee 80, you have Forcepoint available there, you have RAT security management. So make sure you have the sandboxing environments available, and these sandboxing environment will allow you to run the code in that environment first, verify the behavior, and then allow that code to be executed on the target or on the machine. Then have those input output validations done in your application. If you do not have input output validation, or if you don't have a good patch management practice, make sure you have a web application firewall as well in front of your application so that it can filter some of the incoming requests and the outbound responses as well. Code testing and the bug fixes to be done. You should have the DEP, which is the data execution prevention policies, which will disallow the arbitrary code to be executed on the machine. So make sure that this DEP feature is enabled on your Microsoft environment. Application whitelisting should be done while you are trusting only a small subset of the applications which have been tested and approved by the organization. So these are some of the controls that a defense can put in to disrupt the exploitation stage. And then you have the installation stage, where from an attacker point of view, you can do a DLL injection. You can have a Metapreter session, which can be executed from the Metasploit console itself. You can have a remote access tools like NCASBD or CryptCat, which will allow a remote sessions to happen. And these remote access tools, some can be worked in an unencrypted way, like NC is unencrypted network connector or a remote network connection tool, while SBD and CryptCat are the cryptographically enabled version of the NC. So you can have those encrypted communication, which your anti-malware may not be able to determine at a network layer. I mean, you can change the registries as well, a registry entry for the installation. You can have PowerShell commands executed so that the installation can happen. On the defense side, you have the host-based firewall. You can have a check rootkit installed on the Linux machine or on the Unix machine to detect and to prevent both the installation. You can have a UBA EDR to detect the installation behavior of the code. You can have incident response plans, which is more of a procedural control. You can have incident responders as the individuals who can respond to the situation, but make sure that these responders or incident responders have attained a specific knowledge about the incident and are educated enough or skilled enough to handle those situations. If you think that they are not ready, don't let them touch an evidence and rather look out for an external support from the investigative agency. Backup and recovery strategies should be there, and minimum user rights on the system should be configured. Then patch management and application whitelisting are some common controls that an organization can have in the environment. So any question till now on the first to fifth stage of the cyber kill chain? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Then we have the sixth stage, which is on the command and control, where the attacker can open up a communication channel with the compromised host or the network while operating it from the cloud environment. So they may not be visible directly even on the internet, and they can have their own cloud setup from where they can be controlling your devices or the machines or the systems. The control against this is to have the segmentation or a micro segmentation done so that you are not allowing the attack to percolate down to other network zones as well. So you can have the segmentation or a micro segmentation done. Validations of the IP communication should be done based on the command and control IP addresses. This list is available publicly in our open forums in the open websites as well. So make sure you have the access to this list and you are validating the network connection against the IPs which has been mentioned as a command and control centers. Then indicators of compromise should be looked up in the environment, also on the servers, just to see whether there is any indicator of compromise available on the machine or not. An indicator of compromise can be a hash value, can be a file name, can be a DLL, can be an IP address, can be a record entry. So make sure that you have the indicators of compromise identified, and those indicators of compromise are used throughout the system to validate if the system has been compromised or not. Then comes the seventh stage, which is action on the target, which talks about the exfiltration of the data, encryption of the entire disk so that the ransom can be asked for, and the removal of the security feature. Now, these are some of the actions that an attacker can do on the target. On the defense side, we can have the access management or the access controls implemented, which is again a common control across the layers. We can have the lateral movement and the DLP as well are some of the controls that an organization can have. Then zero trust architecture can be implemented as well, wherein the there is no trust boundaries exist within the environment, and every action or every execution of a executable or the command is validated first for the purpose and for the authenticity, and once it is proven, then the command is allowed or the executable is allowed to be run on the machine. To have those zero trust architectures implemented, application filtering and the backup and restoration are again some of the common controls that we have talked about. So in a nutshell, if you look at, we have talked about some 15 odd, I would say, controls which are unique, 15 to 20 controls which are unique. Out of these 15 to 20, if the organization is able to implement all of it in a very, very religious manner, then the cyber kill chain to exist is very difficult. It is still possible with the help of a zero-day exploit, but then it is difficult for an attacker to gain an access and then execute the code and follow this entire cyber kill chain as a model. So make sure that your patch management and capacity or the change management practices are indeed being followed and are very, very practical as well. Any question till now on these 7 stages of the cyber kill chain?
Yeah, Dr. Paras,
Yeah.
I would like to know this command and control attacker, right?
Hmm.
So,
So what
oh,
happened is,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, so what happened? Let's say if I have created a malware and I have delivered it to you, so Deepak executes it, and then the machine of Deepak is compromised. Now the machine is compromised, I automatically get, let's say, a CMD prompt of Deepak's machine. And once I have the CMD prompt, I can either run certain commands to download even further exploits or the malwares. I can do a scanning. I can stop certain services. I can start certain services. I can transfer the data from Deepak's machine to my machine and vice versa as well. If there is a webcam attached to Deepak's machine, I can take a webcam picture of it. If there is a sound card attached to or a printer attached to it as a peripheral, I will be able to issue certain commands to compromise your network printer, for example, or to take a random printouts, which obviously can be disheartening or not very cozy to look at. So, and the purpose of having a command and control is to have a persistent access. So if I close the session today, since I have already compromised Deepak's machine, I should have a capability to enable the session again at my will as an attacker. So if I have to use your machine as a bot, I will be able to do that as well to hide my traces. If I see some interesting information on your machine, I will transfer that information to my machine. So all those things can happen with the command and control center.
And this indicators of compromise, how do they work? Like, is that a tool or?
So there is a tool, and there are multiple tools for it to search for indicators of compromise. But then you have to tell those tools what are the indicators of compromise you're looking for as well. So, for example, an indicator of compromise can be a simple list where you have uh, some, I would say, hash numbers given, you have some IP addresses given, you have some, let's say, file names given. So you can have those indicators of compromise. So if I look at it, for example, so FBI green. So let's say if we look at this one. So this is one of the advisory, and so this is more like mapping it to the kill chain. So these are more like a tactic and a technique from a attack Mitre framework perspective that we will look at. So for example, this is one.
Dr. Paras, I don't know if it's you or me. Your voice is breaking a lot, or I'm unable to hear it.
Oh, is it still the same?
It's just on and off, so don't know if others are able.
Yes, for us.
Oh, it's not audible, is it?
Yeah, I think since the last 5 minutes, like since you opened that web, this one, right? IOC.
Oh, okay.
Since then,
It should be better now.
okay.
I think some problem with the system, but If you look at this particular screen, you see some hash numbers, right? These are indicators of compromise. If you look at this exe page manager.exe, this file name itself is an indicator of compromise, may or may not be. So you may have explorer.exe with a hash value attached to it. So in your machine or in your network, if you try to search for a hash value, you will be able to determine what all systems have the same hashes on their machines or on the system, so that you can then make sure that these systems are compromised and you have the appropriate defenses available to protect against it. If you look at these IP addresses, you can put these IP addresses into a filtering mode on your proxies to restrict the communication between the systems. If you then again this VM upgrade helper, this Twain64 DLL, you have the hashes, you have the IP addresses, you have the indicators as well. What is this? So it's a PowerShell implant C2. These IP addresses may or may not be a command and control IP addresses, but if you see these indicators of compromise, essentially means that these IPs were involved at some point in time in, in the particular attack, or in some attack in some shape and form. May or may not be a command and control center, may be an IP to deliver a weapon to the system. But then you have to make sure that these IP communication is not happening within or outside your network. Similarly, if you see
Paras sir, your voice is not audible.
is it still bad?
Uh, were you talking now,
I
sir?
think you're not talking, right? I think intermittently you're speaking up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'm just saving my energy. Sorry for that.
Bhumika, you might have to check your internet connection because I have no disruption.
Yeah, yeah, I'll do that once again.
Okay, so this is a fake site database. Now, these fake sites can also be an indicator of compromise if you see the traces of these URLs in communication into your proxy logs. So, for example, if you see a communication happening with hsbcint.com, it's a fake website, which means it can be a website related to a phishing or related to a delivery of a payload. So you need to make sure that in your proxy logs, you don't see a traces of this word. So don't look at this website as a website. Look at this text as a text only. And you have to search this text into your logs to see if these text traces appear or not. Similarly, if you have the IP addresses, so you can search your proxy logs for those IP addresses to see those traces. Similarly, you have the hash of a file as well. So you have to search for the hashes in your environment in the systems to validate whether those hashes exist or not. If any of it matches, to your search, let's say, then you can tell that this particular system is compromised and you need to take care of that machine or that system. So disconnect that from the network, don't power it off, do all that forensic and apply those forensic techniques as well. But then idea is to determine whether your system is or your environment is compromised or not. There was a client, uh, or rather, I can tell you this, there's a service that in my last organization, which was PwC, they created a tool which will search for these kind of anomalies in the environment and will alert and will do all the analysis and then come up with the results to say these are the 10 machines in the system which are already compromised. Now, is this the only tool? The answer is no. There are multiple tools available. Yara is just one of those scanners as well, which can help you out with this. But then the idea is to determine at a larger level where the infections are and where the infection can be. And there is a company in Chennai where when we went for a different discussion for a different project, we were discussing about some of the capabilities that we had. And this company said, leave aside everything. Tell me, can you do a scanning of my entire infrastructure and pinpoint the system which are already compromised? Why? Because they already have faced some issues in the past where some of the emails have gone out, some of the confidential information which was stored on the shared drive have gone out, not through emails. They have checked their emails as well, but they suspect. So they said, can you check for the infections minus the malwares? Can you check for the indicators of the compromise on my entire environment? If yes, then please come and do whatever you want to do. Right? So these kind of services are catching up really, really quick in the market, and there are very less tools which are comprehensive, I would say. There are tools which can do very good job in a specific way. So there will be tool which can look out for the proxy logs and can tell you there's a communication that has happened with the CNC server. But then there's a CNC server communication that has happened. This is the file which was infected and this is how it came inside the network. This correlation today is not very stringent or not very practical, I would say. So these are some of the IOCs that you can look out for in the environment as well.
So sorry, just a doubt here.
Yeah.
When you said it's not practical, what does it exactly mean?
What the correlation?
Yeah, correlation of IOCs with the proxy.
So let's say you have certain IOCs. You have www.hsbcint.com, which is a URL. You have some hash value. You have some exe name, let's say cal.exe, and let's say you have an IP address. Okay. So these are 4 IOCs that you have. Now, this particular URL, you will look out in the proxy logs. This particular IOC, you will search it on the system or the machine. This again, you will search it on the system or the machine. And this is something that you will look out probably in the proxy logs again, proxy or the internet logs. Now, you will have a tool which will do this for you. So you can search the proxy or the internet logs for these 2 IOCs. You will have a tool which will do the same thing for the machine and for the system. Now, what I'm saying is how this so there are few questions that arise. So how cal.exe lands up in the machine at first place? Okay, so you need to have a cal.exe hash value matching up to the transfer of the file which has happened probably over the internet or through the USB. So you will need to look, so to answer this question, you will need to look at USB logs. You need to look at the internet logs. You need to look at the email logs. That's how you will get to know how this has landed up in your environment. The second thing is cal.exe really a threat? It can be a legitimate file as well, but since you have an indicator of compromise, which is similar to what has been seen in the other breaches or other environment as well, so you will say yes, it is vulnerable or it is a threat. But then is that threat applicable on your environment? So for example, cal.exe was created for oil and gas sector, but yours is a ITES sector. And the threat of an oil and gas be equal and same impactful to the ITES sector? The answer is may or may not be, depending upon the threat situation itself. So you really need to figure out what IOCs you are searching in the environment and what are they used for. Is your sector prone to the same threat or not? There can be a virus, there can be a malware looking for a specific printer type or a specific kind of information on the system, which you may not have. It may be looking out for certain signal which you may not have in the environment. So whether the threat is equally the same or not, so that needs to be identified. Then is cal.exe a standalone or can be controlled remotely? You have certain IP addresses, so you will need to figure out whether the IP is a Dropbox or a Dropbox or a command and control center or a CNC server basically. So if it is a Dropbox only, and so if it is a Dropbox and the threat is related to oil and gas, then you can say there is a threat, but the chances of the impact having the same is way too less, because I am operating into a different sector and this threat is not applicable to me. But if it is a command and control related server, though it is on a ITITS sector and which is different than the oil and gas, but since it is a command and control related server, the threat elevates further. Why? Because now it is giving a remote access of my machine to somebody else. And even though the threat is not applicable to my environment, it may be tweaked according to my environment by the attacker. So if it is a CNC server and ITITS sector, it is still a threat. But if it is a Dropbox for ITITS and you are into ITITS sector, the risk is less or the threat is less. So when I say that the tools are not intelligent enough or are not practical, they are not able to answer some of these questions precisely. What they can tell you, yes, the IOC has been found. There is an indicator of compromise on your machine. There is an indicator of compromise in your proxy log. And hence, they may conclude that there is a threat, which may or may not be depending upon the situations or the questions that you are posting logically. I hope that answered.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
So, Dr. Porras, there are various techniques listed here for defense.
Mhm.
So this is, I think, just giving a landscape view, considering this
Correct.
introductory course. So would we
Yes.
be kind of exploring some of these techniques further in detail in any of the courses down the stream?
Yes. So you would be, so for example, let's start from here. So you would be looking at the attacker view as well. So let's say looking at the nmap, looking at the vulnerability scanning, looking at the Google Docs, Shodan. So you will be looking at the reconnaissance from an attacker's point of view. You will be looking at honeypots from a defensive standpoint as well.
Okay.
You will be looking at how to carry out phishing, for example, from an attacker point of view. Plus, you will be looking at searching for the IOCs in the logs or in the systems as well to determine whether the indicator of compromise exists or not. Right. So you will be looking at both the perspective, attackers as well as the defense.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So we'll take a break for 15 minutes and let's rejoin by 11:30 then.
Yes, sir.
All right. Are we back?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So, summarizing the cyber kill chain, so we have 7 phases like reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, establishing the command and control, and then actions on the objectives. And then we can, from a response perspective, we can detect, deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive the attack. Now, the controls that we have identified or that we looked at, we can categorize them into different sections. So majority of the controls would fall into a detect. However, there can be certain controls depending upon the breach situation, which can go into either a denial or a disruption or a degradation or a deceivement as well. For instance, the honeypot would go into a deceive category, whereas having a antivirus or a patching can go into a disruption or a denial as well. Similarly, from a degradation standpoint, if we are good on the MFA multi-factor authentication, or if we are having a need to know privileges or least privileges on the machine, that will degrade the performance of an attack. So from an responder's perspective, we can detect, we can deny, we can disrupt, we can degrade, and we can deceive the attack based on what phase of the kill chain or what phase of a Lockheed Martin model we are going to disrupt the entire chain or break the entire chain. So when we are planning for the controls, when we are planning for a specific threat actor or a threat situation, we can look at these 5 stages of the responses as well and see at what stage we are going to break the chain. Many antivirus or anti-malware softwares today, which is at an enterprise class, they can tell you if there is a malware. They can also tell you at what stage the attack was averted or the breach was or the infection was averted. So they can indicate that as well. But it is always good to have these views in place, like we had the similar exercise in strides where we thought about a situation, we came out with recommendations. Similarly, in the cyber kill chain, we will get into 2 groups where you will have a situation, a kind of a random situation, or the situation that you have experienced earlier being talked about. And from a detect, denial, disrupt, degrade, and deceive standpoint, you will try to put in or map the controls according to the 7 phases of the skill chain as well. And don't look at only these controls. You can have administrative controls, you can have technical controls as well, whatever you feel is good. And the situation can be of your choice as well. Okay, so how many participants we have today? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We have 16. So we can get into a group of 8 individuals, and then let's rejoin in 15 minutes in this group itself. And one of the person from each respective group would be a representative, and the person would talk about the situation and the controls that they have thought about. Yeah. So first aid can go into one batch. So Bhumika, can you create those rooms?
Sorry, sir. What was the ask? What is the task?
The task is you will get into eight member group. So one group will be 8 member, the second group will be 8 member. Each group will have to talk through one situation, or they can discuss one breach situation. They can assume or based on their experience and come up with a matrix of this sort where you have the phases and you have a controls mentioned against a particular threat.
We lost you, Dr. Paris.
Can you hear me, Deepak?
Yeah, now it is better.
Okay, so I am
Yeah, we can
saying,
hear you now.
for a particular threat situation that you can assume, you can come up with a matrix like this, where you have 7 phases of the kill chain, and you have the controls mentioned in the 5 stages for that particular threat situation. And these controls can be procedural controls, can be technical controls.
Okay. So, okay, then we'll, I, okay, so this is Deepak. So I will pull the first 8 into one group, and the next 8, someone else can pull.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Yes. And we will have only 15 minutes to perform this exercise.
So Deepak just went into some other room with
So
um
can you just pull him into the main room?
Amy isn't there. Amy isn't. Sir, how do you create this room exactly? I don't have the option to create it now.
Okay, I think they have already gone to the room.
Yeah.
But typically, you get to see something here. I mean, who is the organizer of the meeting, they can do it.
Okay.
We'll have to take a breach and
Bhumika, I'm still not in any room.
Same here, Bhumika.
So how many of the people are there in this main room without the second room? Or
I think
probably
most of
Sharanya, you can just okay. So probably you can just create a room for yourself and discuss this out within your small group.
Yeah, I'm also there, sir. Shweta.
Yeah, Shweta. So probably you two, or if there is anybody else,
even
you
I
can
am
get into one room.
not in a group, sir.
Yeah, I'm the Paris, Dr. Paris.
Okay, so probably three or four of you who are still in this main thread, you can get together into one small talk or a
No,
group
sir.
and then discuss this out. Yeah.
Guys, whoever wants to be in one room, please raise your hands. Bilkeshi sir is creating one.
Are we back?
I think they're still
No,
doing
that's
it, sir.
fine. We'll go together.
Okay, sure. Are we back now? Are we back now?
We're just coming back from our room.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect.
we are back.
All right. So I think most of us are most of us are back. So, so who is going to represent from your team, or who is the representative who wants to go first?
Afzal.
I think maybe the other group can go first this time. Last time we went first.
Yeah, we want to give them a chance.
All right. Anybody else who wants to go first? If everyone is back. Yeah, I don't think so that everyone is back as of now. So let's give them another 5 minutes.
Paras sir, if you could also give us a real world scenario after the presentations of both the teams. If you can give us
Absolutely.
a real time scenario for Cyber Kilchen or Lockheed Martin, that'll be great.
Sure, sure.
We did it
Absolutely.
for the very first time. We might be not sure as uh, what we're doing because I went through a couple of documents. They also include one more column called contain, uh, which
Hmm.
which they use apart from what do you say? All the four cyberkill methods. or what do you say, layers which they use, like detect, deny, disrupt, degrade, or
Hmm.
deceive. They've also added one more column called contain.
Hmm.
So if you could give us some more insight of that, it'll be good.
Sure, sure.
So anyone from the other group is going to present?
Yeah, we're just giving them another couple of minutes to come back,
Okay.
and then they can present. Yeah.
So Dr. Paras, like there are a lot of techniques you covered, but are there any like market leading products that will encompass most of these capabilities? It just seems like there are some small tools for specific features, but I'm just curious, like if there are any overarching softwares that are available that can provide at least most of the ground covered.
See, from a I would say from a cyber kill chain perspective, there are multiple tools. It's not a single tool which can fit all the 7 stages, but but rather you have multiple tools that you can utilize and integrate together. So, for example, many organizations have already invested on SOC. It's just a matter of creating rules and integrating your IOC feeds into the SOC system so that, or the SIM system, so that you get the feed associated with it and you can correlate your systems accordingly. Similarly, many organizations have already invested in antiviruses, for instance. So they have those anti-malware, antivirus technologies already implemented. So it doesn't make sense, A, for them to reinvest on something only for a cyber kill chain. Secondly, there is no one solution which fits all the layers of the cyber kill chain as well. So there are multiple tools that you can use, multiple techniques and technology that you can use to correlate this. But when you are looking to have a view of a cyber kill chain completely, that's where you can probably look at one of the tool from Looking Glass as well, which you can which you can use to view at what stage the attack is moving across. So that is something that you can look at. But then again, it doesn't have one solution. So you have, for example, a Scout Threat or a Scout Prime as a two tools coming from Looking Glass. So you can use that to have a view of your attack surface. It's more like a vulnerability discovery, the asset discovery, and then giving you a perspective of the cyber risk in that situation. Similarly, from a Scout threat tool perspective, you have different threat models which are available there, and then you can look at how those threat models affects you. When we are going to look at the Mitre attack framework, that's where you will come across a tool which is called an attack navigator, wherein while you have done this exercise in in this forum, there will be you can take the similar I would say scenario that you have considered right now. You can take similar scenario and transform that into the attack navigator to give you a better view of the techniques or the tactics that from an offensive standpoint that the attacker can take. and and correspondingly you can come up with the response strategies as well. So we'll take a view at it, but from to answer your question, from a tooling perspective, there is no one solution which fits it all.
Okay. Okay.
Dr. Paras, another question.
Yes.
So let's say we cannot contain all the time, right? So
Correct.
there are chances where it will get breached, and so will there be a plan to how to mitigate those things or how to overcome those situations?
See, once the breach happen, it is no more called as an incident. I mean, you can term it as an incident from a security standpoint, but the impact or the capability of an incident is smaller than the capability of a breach. Now, once the breach happen, there are multiple things that one needs to be aware about. One important aspect is a notification to the regulatory bodies. Not all the incidents you are going to report it to, let's say, CERT. But then, if there is a breach situation that has happened where the customer information or a personal information is compromised, then you are expected to reach out to the legal or the regulatory bodies and inform them within a specific duration, depending upon the law, that you are under a breach. So, notification becomes one important aspect. Along with the notification, there is another process that kicks in, which is on the communication. This communication is different than the notification, wherein the communication will focus on addressing the stakeholders. So your PR team, for example, would kick in to have a communication with the customers. If you are into supporting the customers over a call, then how your customers will, or what kind of a script your BPO agents will read out to your customers when they call in. If you remember, there's a breach that happened in Target when the customers were calling in Target. Target was clueless about it, and their calls were going on wait, which created more disruption to the Target business than the breach itself. So, from a breach response standpoint, you have to address your stakeholders well. So, have a communication strategy for your customers, for investors, for your internal employees as well, for your vendors as well. So, that plays a second key important role. Then, have a responder team available within your organization which can provide a first response to the breach scenario. Now, when we talk about a first response, it is always about collecting the evidence and making sure you draw the boundaries from a scope perspective. You cannot say that my entire organization is under a breach. So you need to have a team who can quickly identify what are the system components which have been compromised and isolate them. So when I say isolate, it is not about powering it off. It is about creating network rules, for example, to restrict the network communication, or or taking their network cables out. So contain or isolate the environment. Then have your investigators start on the investigation. If you have those investigators in-house, very good. If not, have the ready agreements done with the external parties or the external investigative agencies. For example, Verizon provides a cover contract wherein they give a contract. They proactively sign a contract for 60 hours with a company, or 40 hour, whatever the company demands. And if they are under a breach, they don't have to negotiate the contract with Verizon. So immediately they call up a number, a hotline number, and the Verizon investigators will be on the way. Within 24 hours, they will land up to the breach scenario across the world, and they will start the investigation. So those kind of contracts you need to negotiate beforehand and have that handy in place. Now, this is more on the process or a procedure side. From a tooling standpoint, you need to make sure that you have the SOC systems or your SIMs accurate. The NTP becomes a very, very crucial piece of technology when it comes to the investigation because of the timestamp information on the logs. So make sure your NTP is sanitized. Make sure your SIEMs or your entire SOC setup is access controlled. And if you believe that itself SOC is compromised or that area is also compromised, again isolate that environment and wait for the external investigators to land up and do the investigation on that too. But idea is to make sure that you have all the logs available. The logs are collected and secured before somebody erases those logs. So your logs are evidentiary proof and it indicates a lot of things about how, what, who, when, where. So those logs needs to be collected and secured, and then the investigation starts. Now when the investigation starts, that's when the questioning or the interrogation starts to happen with the individual. So make sure your individuals who are technology aligned are available for the questioning. Make sure your IT systems which are isolated, the images of those IT systems are collected and secured, and the integrity of those images or the evidence is also secured. Make sure your data that you are looking for, which is compromised, those data elements and the nearby data elements to that data are also isolated. So if you have a database which is compromised, be rest assured that other databases on the same server will also be compromised. So make sure that you are not isolating or you're not restricting the scope of the data compromise. So be open to the investigative agencies and they will help out. From an investigative agency standpoint, they largely use a tool called NCASE for the investigation. It's a license tool, about 11 lakh rupee worth a license for a single user. And this NCASE helps in collecting the evidence, in analyzing the evidence and reporting as well. And this is one tool which is acceptable in the court of law as well. So they use NCASE, Autopsy, FTK Imager, a lot of other tools as well to capture and analyze the evidences. So that's how the breach response should be planned. In case of an incident, you just need to have a, a kind of a notification to the internal or the external stakeholders depending upon the incident severity. You need to have the learnings out of coming out of the incident. You need to make sure that awareness is spread across the relevant stakeholders and the containment efforts happen. So more or less it runs parallel to the breach, but the gravity of the impact between the two is different, and hence the response differs in both the situations as well.
Okay.
I hope that answered.
Sure, Dr. Paras. So we'll have an in-house team as well, right? So like, let's say you said
Yes.
Verizon will do the investigation part, like not for the investigation, for at least, so we should have some sort of a response team available.
Yes. So what organization do normally, the SOC team itself will get trained on the first response or a first-hand response. They call it as a rapid response training. I mean, different organizations use different terminologies or different names. But in Verizon, we create a rapid responders wherein the initial set of members would be from the IT or the SOC team of the company itself. So we will go on the site, we will train them, we will give them some tools to capture the evidences, we will tell them how to procedurally do the steps, we will define the processes and policies and procedures for them. So all that pre-hand exercise is done, and after that is done, that is where the Verizon team will then come back. So in case of a breach, the IT team or the first responders of the company are expected to collect the evidence. And within 24 hours, Verizon's team will land, take over those evidences, and start the investigation. So that's the model that they work in.
Okay. Okay. Sure, doctor.
All right. So if we are back, can we have the presentation started?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
All right. I will stop sharing my screen then. So who is going first?
So please let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Off mute. Okay. So we have just listed out the tools or the mitigation that can be put in place for the different phases for general scenario.
And what is that scenario?
Web application scenario, and the other one we initially started for a web application scenario, and then we also did it for this threat scenario. Any user with stolen credentials can log into bank application.
Oh.
So the detect, we will consider audit logs, monitoring, IDS and DDNA will be in place. Then deny MFA, whitelisting, DDNA again. Then disrupt DDNA, degrade strong password policy. Is that right?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so anything else that you think could have been added here?
So when you say denial, for example, you are whitelisting what?
Whitelisting, the application whitelisting was there.
So it's a login credential which is stolen. So you're whitelisting an application or you're whitelisting something else. So for example, if I have stolen your credential, then I can log in from India, I can log in from Nepal, I can log in from Sri Lanka, I can log in from China. So you're whitelisting the geography, or you're whitelisting the laptop from which I can log in by having that authentication token, a hardware token authentication, or what kind of whitelisting is this?
Okay, we've not thought about it. Anybody who wants to answer that?
What is whitelisting?
Of what?
So in general, like whitelisting they've mentioned, right? So
I think it's primarily about like allowable entities, like, from an application standpoint, we could whitelist certain number of users, or from a network standpoint, we can whitelist certain IPs, reliable IPs. So usually it will be encompassing all the employees in an organization or all the known devices and their respective IPs, something like that.
Okay. In that
so
case,
this is a
So
this is a bank application. So this is a bank application. So you cannot whitelist or blacklist a IP, because at an ISP level, if you, let's say, blacklist a particular IP, there might be hundreds of IPs behind that public IP, which means for one stolen credential, for example, you are disallowing a service to hundreds and thousands of individuals, and there might be legitimate user behind that public IP as well.
So whitelisting would not apply to this scenario, right?
It will be, so it may not apply, but what you can do is you can have a whitelisting or a blacklisting of the compromised credential. So let's say if you're not aware about which credential is compromised. So So you can have a whitelisting done on the geography that only people from India would be allowed to log in and use the banking application. But let's say you have the NRI accounts. So you would allow the NRI accounts to be used from the specific geography for which they have shared their identity or their application, which means that your authentication will be based on your username, your password, and the geography from which you have registered or for which you have registered. So if these three matches, then your authentication will be successful in a normal course of time. Now, in case of a stolen credential, and let's say I am also from India, you are also from India. Now, in this case, my all these three conditions would match. And that is where a user profiling or a fraud detection component come in place, wherein if you ever notice, for example, if you go to ICICI Bank website or HDFC for that matter, when you try to authenticate to a system from one particular location, let's say Whitefield, Bangalore location, for the first time it will ask me that since you're logging in from a Whitefield location, we need an extra layer of security. So enter your debit card, ATM number or PIN number or whatever. So they will have that extra layer of security for the first time, which means that they are creating a profile for me. So in their backend fraud detection system or a fraud profiling system, they will categorize that Paras logs in from Whitefield, Bangalore location often. Then Paras goes to Sarjapura to work. And from there, one day, Paras logs in or makes an attempt to log into the ICICI Bank website again. Again, it's a new location for me. So they will ask me for additional layer of security. So that's how they will start to build my profile, and they will say 90% of the time, Paras logs in from Bangalore Whitefield location, do a transaction of up to 10,000 rupees, and usually the session is active for less than 1 minute. So that's a profile. Any deviation from this profile would call in for the additional layer of verification for Paras. Right? So rather than whitelisting, you can call it as a fraud profiling or a fraud profile management system or a fraud management system as well, which is usually sorry, which usually you will see in any of the banking environment. And irrespective of the bank, you will find it in the payment processing environment as well.
Okay.
Similar is the case happen when you take a debit card or a credit card to a high risk countries, wherein if you take it, let's say to a Hong Kong or to, let's say, Thailand or to Nepal, for example, the moment you are back or the moment you do a transaction there, either the transaction will get blocked or you will get a confirmatory call on your mobile from the bank, or the moment you are back from that country, you will have a replacement card automatically shipped to you. Why? Because that's not your normal profile of the transaction. And since you have done a transaction in a high risk country, the bank takes a measure of sending you a card automatically to protect themselves and obviously you as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so stolen credential would largely have, from a denial perspective, would largely have a fraud management system as the control.
Okay, sir.
Sir, just one doubt. In terms of the corporate application, pure corporate application or the administrative applications, so where it is expected that the user should be logged in from only one particular IP or set of IPs. So in this case, the whitelisting will come into picture or not?
Yes. So in that case, if you have a specific set of IPs from where, let's say, a cloud environment, where you are only allowing a set of your IP to connect to the cloud environment from internal to the cloud, then you can have a whitelisting done. Again, from an external perspective, the cloud environment may not have those restrictions, but you can bake in those restrictions as well. on the application which are hosted on the DMZ zone and you want a remote user to administer it, you can have a layer of VPN on top of it, wherein the VPN credentials would be different and the application credentials would be different. So any remote administration, if somebody wants to do, they can connect to a VPN and then to the application. If you do not have a VPN, and you want to do an administrative task, so first of all, your administrative application interface should not be exposed over the internet. Secondly, if you want to do a remote administration, you should have a, let's say, a jump box in between where you log into a jump host. From that jump host, only that jump host is allowed to access the administrative interface of the application. So you log into the jump host, from jump host to the application. So you have two set of credentials there as well. Okay, so you can have whitelisting, but then whitelisting of what, you need to be very, very specific about the scenario and what your whitelisting or blacklisting is well.
Okay. Okay, sir. So sure, to move on, so we have considered the phases: profiling, weaponization, delivery, installation, and we were only able to do till there. Establish C2 and actions on objectives covered briefly. So for the profiling, we can have IDS system to detect in place, and for deny, firewall and block open ports. Prevent the malicious actions using IDS. Block social media site. So deceive, not exposing the real information using the alternate versions, credentials that is used, the software that is used. So fake public websites on the banners. So then the weaponization, audit logging, IDS antivirus. Then deny, we will use patch management, MFA, antivirus, and firewall again. So we can disable macros or any plugins, plugin installations for disruption. So delivery, the detection again, IDS, filtering, domain key identification on email, training and awareness can also help in detecting and as well. WAF, then deny email filtering, Outlook with ATP protection. USB port can be disabled using USB filter, then preventing the malicious actions using IDS. Social media can be blocked. The rest too I covered, which will cover both detect and deny. The exploitation, WAF, audit logging for monitoring purposes, in IDS antivirus. Implementing access control for software execution. Sandboxing to check, create a separate environment, then patch management, MFA, implementing access control for software execution. So then again, exploitation, we can disable macros and plugin installations. Yeah. Installation, we can have check rootkit. Check rootkit, yeah, will cover both detect and deny. Then hashing of software installation. I think I'll leave whitelisting now. So email, Outlook with ATP protection, USB port disable, training and awareness. Then establish C2, validation of IP communication, network segmentation. Implement access control for malware for control of software execution. Whitelisting of IPs and domains, we've been specific here. For denying, sandboxing, antivirus. Actions on objectives, logging, data leak prevention system, then deny can be firewall. Data leak prevention system will also take care of denying, and access management. That's it.
Fair enough. Good attempt. And I think so when we are creating these profiles, We just need to be so right now, for example, we have written at a holistic level, at a high level, but in real scenarios, rather than so like we discussed whitelisting, similarly on other controls as well, we need to be very, very specific. And once we discussed all threat scenarios in the group, we can combine those threat scenarios and the mitigation steps together to determine what controls are overlapping, what controls we need to implement and prioritize first, and what controls we can defer. So we will take a look at that as well. Don't worry, but just sharing that as an experience. But good attempt for sure. So who wants to go next?
I'll be presenting it, Dr. Parash.
Sure.
Hope my screen is visible for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Dr. Parash, we are taking a scenario of a ransomware attack. That's the incident which has triggered for us for a cyber kill chain.
Oh.
And when we do the analysis of to check how can we what is that kill this chain, and what all the ways to detect, protect, and recover. So these are the three areas that we have taken into account. So initial phase on the reconnaissance, we checked, like from the hacker's point of view or the attacker's point of view, we see that the major area they would be doing is they would look for a vulnerable ports or a vulnerable application or weak areas. How we can counter it? So we thought like nmap, we can do again a reconnaissance on the network part, that is nmap, look for open ports. Those are the areas that we feel that we can detect the weakness in our what is that external facing network. And one is that, and did and what is that denying the thing is looking for any sensitive data that is posted on the social network areas like Facebook or some other like forums where any sensitive data are posted, or technical queries with some configuration details with organization details are posted. If we remove that, we can almost deny these what is that vulnerable spots. That's how we got it. And moving on to the weaponization, how attacker would have gained if he was able to gain a vulnerable port that is listed in the infra or sensitive data he has collected. The weaponization would be again, nmap would give the complete detail about the port, if any vulnerable service, what services is running, or metasploits can be the tools that can be used for the weaponization of these what is weapons. And how can we deny that from an attack or from a thing is securing our boundaries like next gen firewalls, then IPS IDS, basically hardening of our external facing network. So any attackers comes in should be through one point of entry, and how it can be is denying it with what is that these kind of controls. In case if the weaponization is successful, we are restricting with what is that VLANs or what is that network restriction, so that the number of compromises within the network can be restricted. So that's the reason we have put network controls like VLANs or segmentations of network. Moving on to delivery of weapon. Delivery of weapon is like through USB or through mail gateways or internet. So how to detect, like example, if an someone is trying to connect through a pen drive or through a bluetooth or any endpoints, we will try to detect through the EDR solutions for end systems. And if next point is, if anyone is trying to, if the delivery is through mail or other things, we will get a what is that, email gateway protections, which will look for malicious intent in sandboxing and mail sandboxing, and then deliver it to the organization's mailbox. If that area is compromised, then what next? How can we, what is that, protect the, how to deny it when something is trying to get installed is, one is USB access, as I told. Second, internet continuously monitoring. Is there any or restricting the internet access? So it doesn't get a reverse shell, or it doesn't get a reverse communication. And patching the vulnerability continuously can deny certain amount of exploits. Then anti-spoofing or phishing protections, or DKM, that is anything that comes through mail can be protected. So this is how we have, what is that, uh, uh, concluded from the compromise part, and how to deny it and how to protect it. Coming to exploitation, example, if they are successfully delivered, and now they are initiating exploitation. So through sim logs or continuous monitoring, that is XDR, not only from the systems, from other network devices or any other devices, we will be continuously monitoring the logs to see if there is any malicious activity within the network, to detect that. And how can we deny that is, one is patch management, is as I told you. And second is, any such things can be denied or can be protected is through, how can we disrupt is through sandboxing, or degrade the performances, restricting the user access, or restricting the network within where are we containing the attacker to that particular area. It doesn't travel laterally to other networks. So that's the exploitation. Coming to the installation, if he tries to install any additional things or any changes to any particular system, we would, what is that, look into the system logs. That is where XDR comes into place, application logs. And how to deny is with minimal privilege management. Like I hope now Windows, just to give you that, Windows 11, even though I'm an administrator, it would ask me, do you want to perform this particular action to stop a service or run a service or to install any file. So that's how, like a privilege management. Then if any particular changement happening, challenge with multiple authentication ways to ensure that. That's the thing. uh, Once if the installation is successful, how do we disrupt this? Again, we have uh, put a privilege management network control. So lateral movements will be completely stopped with VLANs and other things. And coming to the control, command and control, how we detect this, only way we can detect this through firewall logs. If the any malicious connectivities are happening or not. And again, coming to the denial part, as we have added something additionally, software defined network and software defined access. Like as you were highlighting, every time you change a location, geographical location, or there is a behavioral change in some a person or employee or a profile, it would challenge for multiple ways of authenticating on a certain area. So in that way, we can deny the command and control, what is that, communication, or data exfiltration. So, and how to disrupt this through proxy controls and network. That's how we can what is that disrupt the command and control in the cyber kill chain. Coming to action on objective is if the attacker is able to compromise and he is able to establish a command and control center. Next area of protection is we would have file integrity monitoring. If integrity of a critical configuration or data is getting changed somewhere, we could look for those areas to see is there any change or what is the intent of that particular attack. And ransomware is again getting the complete system encrypted and taking out denying the access to the critical information. So alternative, we how to disrupt this, we can bring backups into place and restrict the lateral movement, and that's how we can restrict this complete kill chain. So this is our cyber kill chain framework that we have brought for ransomware.
This is very good, Muthu, and you have been detailing it out as well pretty nicely. So I think this kind of covers largely all the controls from a ransomware standpoint. Just one suggestion: when we look at the controls, while you have looked at mostly the technical controls, you should also look at some of the administrative controls as well, because it's a ransomware and it's a larger magnitude of impact. So you should also look at the administrative controls or the procedural controls as well. But overall, from a technology control standpoint, you have covered it well.
Thank you, Paras. Thank you, team, for the support. It was a group effort, Dr. Paras.
Absolutely, Muthu. All right. So, anyone else who is left for the presentation?
Uh, yes, Dr. Paras. That's it.
I think that's it. We just had two teams.
Okay, because I think there was a few people who created the another group as well. All right. So good. So I think we are pretty much clear on the cyber kill chain as a model or as a scenario where we can look out for the threat scenarios and what to respond to those threat scenarios as well. Now, taking this lead ahead of the threat scenarios from a cyber kill chain perspective, on the same foundation of a cyber kill chain, there is another model which is a Mitre attack model which has been based out. Right, so we'll break out for the lunch, and once we are back from the lunch, we will look at this Mitre attack model as well. Okay, and we'll take forward the same situations that we have looked at. We will take those situations ahead and map those to the Mitre attack as well. Okay, so let's take a break for for lunch, and let's be back by 2:15.
Okay, sir.
Sure, Dr. Paras.
Okay, sir.